edition of World Crisis Radio. This is your host, Webster Tarpley, speaking from Washington, D.C. It is the 10th of August. It is the dog days here on the hazy banks of the Potomac. The crisis of the regime rolls on, and we're beginning to see disturbing tendencies in terms of a possible attempted regroupment by the reactionary forces who see themselves, I think, in grave danger and grave trouble. I also took the opportunity on Thursday, yesterday, as I'm recording this, to go down to Alexandria and spend an afternoon auditing the Manafort trial. And I can tell you some interesting things about what goes on in the Manafort trial. This is probably a take that's a little bit different from what you might hear on the normal cable news, sort of more like a first person, right? Some of the things that strike you. So let's also look at a diplomatic crisis with Turkey. It looks like Trump has decided to try to wreck the southern flank of NATO, right? Not content with doing a frontal attack on Germany and France and the British and the NATO alliance as a whole. Looks like he's trying to detach Turkey. And that, of course, is exactly what Putin ordered. So if you're making up a bill of treacherous activities that might be used as a high crime and misdemeanor, the deliberate, needless wrecking of the Turkish membership in NATO, that seems to be what Trump is up to. But let's face the immediate questions here at home. Very interesting to hear that on Wednesday of this week, we had Maddow of MSNBC get a hold of a tape from a group called Fused. And Fused, we'll have to look into them, but the Fused group was able to infiltrate and record parts of a fundraising event. And this event was sponsored by Kathy McMorris Rogers. We're in the Pacific Northwest, right? We're in, I believe, Spokane, Washington. This Kathy McMorris Rogers, the number 4 figure in the Republican leadership, she corresponds to Joe Crowley of Bronx and Queens, who is now ousted by Ocasio. But this Kathy McMorris Rogers now in trouble. And we've reported this repeatedly, right? You've heard it many times here over the past 6 months, right? Because you could see this coming. Kathy McMorris Rogers has not been eliminated from contention, but she barely survived in the jungle primary, right? They have the California system. So Kathy McMorris Rogers, a multi-term incumbent, came in with fewer than 50% of the vote. There was a Democrat breathing right down her neck, and if you do the arithmetic, it looks like the Democrat might have the advantage in the November election. So she's trying to get money, and what did she do? Kathy McMorris Rogers, this reactionary fig leaf for the misogynists around Ryan, around McCarthy, around Scalise, and others, she invited in the Midnight Rider. She invited in Devin Nunes of California. We learn in this that he is of Portuguese descent. Anyway, he is still, through a miracle, I guess, or through a diabolical intervention, he is still the chairman of the House Select Committee on Intelligence. Of course, as soon as you have him, it's not Select anymore. There goes the Select. So he gave a fundraising speech to these backers of McMorris Rogers, and I'm afraid that what comes out of this, the net burden, the kind of conclusion you have to draw, is that the United States appears to be threatened by what amounts to a fascist coup d'etat. And the idea is the following. The Republicans seem to have concluded that they would like to fire Rosenstein. If they could fire Rosenstein and replace him with a stooge, then they could proceed to fire Mueller, the special prosecutor, and they would then be able to stop the investigation of Trump. So we know these scenarios quite well, right? Whether you fire Sessions or not is probably immaterial. Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, gets fired. Then Mueller is invulnerable, and you can strangle him. You can strangle the investigation, or you can simply fire him, and then somebody else other than Trump would be taking the fall. So that's the first step. And then the second step is they want to get Kavanaugh elected, confirmed, as the next justice on the Supreme Court. So that essentially articulates a reactionary or fascist coup d'etat here in the United States. As we have always pointed out, the purpose of all this is not really the eternal glory of Trump, although Trump is a useful tool, a useful idiot he is for sure, but he's a useful vehicle or tool in making this happen. But the goal is ultimately something that would last beyond Trump. It would be a permanent austerity dictatorship. The permanent austerity dictatorship depends on controlling the three branches of government and especially the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court makes the rules in many ways for the other two branches. So what we would then have is the Supreme Court essentially making it just about impossible to vote if you're black, if you're Latino, if you're poor, other categories unlikely to vote for the Republican plutocrats, right, for Boss Tweet or Agent Orange, as others call him. That would be one side of it, and then destroying the only mass organizations that might conceivably mount a mass strike protest capable of stopping or at least interfering, slowing the progress of this dictatorship. And that, of course, would be labor unions. Labor unions did pretty well this past week in Missouri. We're very glad to say that the AFL-CIO and its allies in the labor movement were able to defeat Proposition A, which was, of course, the odious union-busting measure, the right-to-work status, so to speak, depriving people of what the United Nations considers to be a basic human right, collective bargaining, some influence over what happens to you, benefits, working conditions, grievances, wages, and so forth. So better than 2-1. And we're very glad, therefore, to repeat our analysis, which has been for years. This is New Deal America. This is not neocon America. It's not Trump's MAGA America. It is New Deal America. Roosevelt, Franklin D. more powerful than Trump or any of these other characters. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So as we reported in detail during the course of the week, Missouri voters have routed the reactionary Republican union busters and indeed fascist elements in there too, as we'll be seeing increasingly. They have defeated Proposition A, by a landslide margin, 68% to 32%. It's even better than Ohio in 2011, when a proposal to wipe out collective bargaining for state workers was also defeated, but not by a margin slightly less strong than this one. So it's New Deal America. Make no mistake. The implications are for both parties. For the Republicans, back off. You want to know what's good for you? Back off. Don't mess with the labor rights and other rights of the American people, the economic rights. Take your hands off Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, the New Deal, New Frontier, and Great Society programs. But it also means, hey, Bernie and company, hey, Ocasio, hey, you people, dump this stupid stuff with socialism. You're not socialist. You think it's cool? It's not cool. It's a failure. And you're not even socialist. You don't seem to know what socialism is. Socialism, of course, defined as the government ownership of the means of production. But most of the people on the left wing of the Democratic Party will say, what's production? They haven't quite thought that one through. But you don't need to have recourse to these tired slogans. I understand this Democratic Socialists of America, they even give you courses in Marx. Oh, my Lord. Karl Marx, British agent, the guy who essentially put the labor movement on a false, wrong path where it's been languishing for a good 100 years or more. No, we don't need Marx. We don't need socialism. These things have been tried. They have failed. The best you're going to do with socialism is something like these rather stifling social democratic one-party states. They're not really what they used to be, but in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and so forth, places like Sweden, Denmark, you get the idea. These were places that had socialism. Of course, there are some features of it. If you look at the features of it from the U.S. point of view, there are some attractive features, to be sure. But the general pattern is not satisfactory. And again, there's no reason to have recourse to the socialism stuff when the example of the New Deal is readily available. Everybody knows more or less what it is. It's widely accepted. It is a proven political winner in 4 presidential elections for FDR, later on for Truman, for LBJ, big landslide for him, for Kennedy, and so on down the line. The Democratic Party losing its way is the moment when it turned away from New Deal America, right? Instead of New Deal Democrats with Clinton and Gore, we got new Democrats. We don't need new Democrats. We don't want them. Those are the right-wing Democratic Leadership Council type. So obviously you want to have a very radical program, but once again, socialism has nothing to do with it. And to tell people they need to take courses in Marx, no. Courses in Alexander Hamilton, please, and you will be in a much better frame of mind. Obviously, the Alexander Hamilton stuff has got to be brought up to date for the 21st century, and we've told you exactly what to do. The common denominator, right? Go to our YouTube channel, the Webster Tarpley fan channel, and you can read all about, you can hear all about the common denominator, right? What we're going to do with the Federal Reserve when we take it over, in addition to taxing Wall Street speculation. But now, once again, the threat, what we're hearing from these Republicans caught off guard is that they'd love to fire Rosenstein and Mueller right now, but they're afraid that that would then lead to chaos in the Congress, a constitutional crisis. Maybe the Democrats could even pull themselves together and do extreme parliamentary obstructionism, which they have not done, which they should try. They should be ready for it under certain circumstances. We'll tell you in a minute. But the danger now is that they're going to put Kavanaugh through in the Senate, and then they can turn around and fire Rosenstein and the stooge replacing Rosenstein would then proceed to fire Mueller. And at that point, you would have a dictatorship. Whether reactionary or fascist, you can debate that, but it would be ugly, and you don't want it. It would be the permanent austerity dictatorship. Once again, it means no unions, very little right to vote, big money totally dominates politics, and of course media, same kind of story. No fairness doctrine, there hasn't been one in decades, but nothing even vaguely like that. Now, with Kavanaugh, this is going to have to be, in a way, a coup d'etat. We are now told that the Republicans, under Senator Grassley, and he's got a lawyer in there. The guy's the lawyer for Bush, for Bannon, for Priebus, and others. And that character is going to be acting as gatekeeper, screener, censor, sanitizer of whatever documents come in pursuant to requests from these Democratic senators. We want to know what Kavanaugh's track record is. And in particular, we already have grave suspicions, grave doubts, because you'll remember Kavanaugh was working for Bush. He was an advisor to Bush. He was in the office of the White House legal counsel, and then he was also a kind of a general roustabout for Bush and for Cheney in there too. And of course, the main policies of the Bush-Cheney administration included torture, included renditions, kidnapping, secret prisons, black sites, the whole horrendous apparatus of what they called the war on terror, right, which we critiqued implacably at the time. So Kavanaugh figured that he needed to hide any connections with torture, black sites, kidnapping, renditions, and so forth. And apparently he fibbed. He lied under oath to the Senate, is the overwhelming impression. And we've had not just, a couple of senators, right? We've had Senator Leahy, who was around at the time, complaining about this perjury. We had Durbin, who was also around at the time, complaining. And then we had the senator from Connecticut, Blumenthal, last night. So we're going to continue on this in just a second, but the bottom line, of course, is stop Kavanaugh. Stop this coup in its tracks. Stop Kavanaugh. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now, remember, we are urging you in this very hot election season as we go into this, the final, what do we got, 90 days, if that, until the vote. You want to be here. You want to hear the analysis day by day. And we put it out, and you are welcome to come and get it. AmericanSystem.tv. AmericanSystem.tv. Please join us. It's also a way to support this voice, which is not the same, not Mushhead, not Trump, but unique, I think. I think that's fair to say. So it's a unique investment in being informed and also knowing what's happening. Cognitio per causas, cognition, understanding things according to their causes. So, Kavanaugh, make sure he doesn't get confirmed. And the Republicans, they're censoring the documents, right? The guy's got a large paper trail. There are lots and lots of things. There are lots of documents that they're going to try to hide. Maybe they're even destroying these documents. You can't trust these people for 1 second because they regard, from the point of view of this permanent austerity dictatorship, they say we've got to have a reactionary justice. We got to have a reactionary to fascist majority on the Supreme Court, and this guy Kavanaugh is the key. And there it is. So it's a question of pure power. You can forget about the independent judiciary if you get Kavanaugh. Remember, this guy, when I say he's a harbinger of the permanent austerity dictatorship, the guy is an active, conscious theoretician of dictatorship, what Cheney and company called the unitary executive. And you remember those guys, Bybee and you and so forth, all the people writing, yeah, torture, we can do it. Geneva Convention does not exist. The lawlessness of Trump, what you see Trump doing to immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees, this started in the recent days with Bush. Bush is not a good guy. Bush the younger, in particular. He was essentially a quasi-dictator at various times, right? And his escapades must not be repeated. So there's the framework. A coup. That's what they're planning. The question was, why don't you fire Mueller right away? Well, that would tie up the Senate. If there were a trial, in impeachment, right? And would you be able to get it? So don't do that. Get Kavanaugh first, then you've got your covering majority on the Supreme Court of absolutely unprincipled reactionaries and bounders. And then you can destroy Mueller. So there it is. You want to have freedom? Libertarians, you care about your civil liberties or anything else? Rule of law? This is the end of the rule of law. It can't be said vehemently enough. And do you want to have a torturer, a front man for torture on the Supreme Court? We would rather not. Now, the other thing we wanted to mention with Trump that makes this rather dramatic is, of course, this question of Turkey and Erdogan. And it looks like we've got the parting of the ways between Trump and Erdogan. Now, we've always been critics of Erdogan, right? We tried to show you how Erdogan was implicated, along with his family, in the running of ISIS. According to some, Erdogan was the grande vecchio. He was the strategic boss of ISIS, according to many. So he's also the guy who has rolled back, to some degree anyway, the heritage of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the great father of modern Turkey, which was to get religion, to get Sharia law, to get other elements of old-fashioned Islam, I guess we can say. Get those out of the public sphere. Have a secular state, and made a lot of progress. Under Ataturk, remember, Turkey is the only country on the losing end of World War I that did not become fascist. They did not. Whereas the others, right, from Italy, Germany, Bulgaria, whatever you want, Hungary, right, all turned fascist. So we remain admirers of Ataturk and therefore opponents of Erdogan. Now, we had this flirtation, as usual. Trump fascinated by Erdogan as an authoritarian. It's shameful. It's a disgrace. But this seems to have come to the parting of the ways. And we've got Trump saying this morning that he's going to double the U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum coming from Turkey. Now, this is not a lot. This is crazy. You're going to wreck the NATO alliance over this de minimis, insignificant, ultimately, sums, whatever they are, in the millions. Are they in the billions? I don't even think so. And Trump's argument is, the Turkish pound, the lira, Turkish pound, lira originally, libra, right, pound. And, this is places, the Venetians controlled the coast, to be sure. Anyway, the Turkish lira has fallen by, 20-25% just in the last 24 hours. And Trump regards that. He seems to have this idea that that's currency manipulation. I wouldn't look at it that way. It is an honest-to-God crash of the Turkish lira. It's not designed to frustrate your tariff wall, Trump. It's that there really is an economic crisis. And, of course, this fits with what we've been saying here for the past several weeks, that we are going inexorably towards some moment of reckoning in terms of the Trump stock bubble and other asset bubbles that have been fomented by Trump. And we went through it all, right? We've got the Chinese attacking the real estate markets here. We've got the Russians attacking the treasury bonds. We've got the Federal Reserve raising interest rates and carrying on their quantitative tightening. We've got the Bank of England raising interest rates and the European Central Bank ending their quantitative easing. So remember, we're going to have about $1 trillion less in liquidity in the next few months compared to previously, and that is probably going to have the effect of popping, deflating, bringing down the Trump stock bubble. And of course, from our point of view, since it's going to happen, let's have it in the next couple of months. Let's have it in August, September, October, before the election, so that the full damage can then redound to the Republicans in the House and Senate, and therefore ultimately to Trump. So, the wrecking of NATO. Remember, Turkey is I think it's the second largest, sometimes it's the largest of the land armies of NATO. And we're hearing now that Erdogan has been on the phone with Putin, and Putin is promising lots and lots of Russian tourists to come in and prop up the Turkish pound. Stupid Trump, you're making it easy for Putin to poach inside NATO. Now, obviously, there are a lot of problems with Erdogan, but you don't kick them out. They've been there for 70 years, so keep them and make sure that they get reform, right? This Erdogan is not going to last forever, and then there's going to be an abreaction. The pendulum will swing back, and Turkey will begin to look more like a modern European country. And having spent some time in Turkey, I think the place has vast potential. Don't let Trump ruin everything, as usual, with his chronic stupidity. And we'll be back. Crisis Radio. Now, what Trump is doing? Why is Trump going off on Turkey? Right, his previous great friend. This has to do with this, I guess, a Protestant fundamentalist, a holy roller, insisting on living in Turkey. Well, the wind is blowing the other way. The Islamic fundamentalists are getting stronger under Erdogan. So this is Reverend Brunson, and Reverend Brunson is he's profiled as an enemy of Erdogan, and he's profiled as someone who, according to Erdogan, took part in the coup of 2 years ago. Now, you notice that guy in the Poconos, right, the Turk living in the Poconos, that seems to have somehow dissipated as an issue, but instead this Brunson has come forward. So what you have to guess is that Trump is trying to posture and to propitiate his backward following of Protestant fundamentalists, and they identified with this Brunson, so they got Brunson out of jail. They sprang him, but now he's living in house arrest. No, they want him out. I don't know what. Do they want him to stay there, get out? The United States cannot be dragged into conflicts by these people from North Korea to Turkey who insist on going into these places, knowing the dangers, and then subjecting us all to the consequences, right? Our patience with these people is at an end. So that's the story with Brunson. There's also, of course, the Incirlik Air Base. You want to keep that. You got to also remember, Turkey and Russia are hereditary natural enemies. There is no doubt. Look at history. Look at the 19th century. What you're going to see is that there's a Russo-Turkish war every 20 years or so. World War I included within it a Russo-Turkish war. Lately, not, thanks to NATO. But if you didn't have NATO, it might go back. And, of course, Putin is in there immediately trying to poach. That guy poaches like there's no tomorrow, right? He can't resist, right? He's obviously in trouble politically. He needs to somehow get successes. So this is what he's doing. Now, In terms of our larger issue, though, the question of systemic crisis in the world financial system, what might this look like? Well, we've been focused on Iran and the Persian Gulf. We've been focused on other questions, right? Other places of instability that might then lead to contagions and so on. What about Turkey? Well, the word is that Turkey, the Turkish banking system, is intertwined in particular with Spanish banks, Spain, and the Italian banking system. Now, the Italian banking system by itself blows out the entire world banking system. Spain, maybe not quite, but the two of them together, absolutely blown out. So this could trigger a systemic crisis, right, of the type that we've been that we've been talking about, right, trying to analyze. We're looking for harbingers. It's getting to be about time, and we'll go through some of the warnings here in just a minute. So, Turkey, you want to become a satellite of Russia? I really don't think. And once again, the whole pattern of recent history goes in a different direction. This would be a diplomatic revolution of the wrong kind. It would be a diplomatic counter-revolution, because the whole thrust of Turkey is to be part of Europe, to be part of the West. I don't think that Erdogan and his Islamic fundamentalists can manage that. I don't think. So, I think this is a deliberate wrecking job by Trump. It's to cater to these fundamentalists here at home, and it has the potential to blow out the world economy. Now, we've also got the crisis going on with Russia. This is being done by the Trump administration, but more or less against the will of Trump, or behind Trump's back. You'll remember that when McMaster was leaving as the National Security Council guy, that was when you had the 60 Russians kicked out. And our analysis was this was, in effect, a Parthian shot by McMaster to get something done, to do it, and present Trump with a fait accompli, and then Trump would be afraid by public opinion that he was such an appeaser and bootlicker for the Russians that he would not be able to roll it back. Now, we're being told that this has now emerged as almost a system. Here we go. Helene Cooper and Julian Barnes in the New York Times yesterday, I think. U.S. officials scrambled behind the scenes to shield the NATO deal from Trump. So here's the gist. Senior American security officials seeking to prevent President Trump from upending, why don't you read, sabotaging, wrecking a formal policy agreement at last month's NATO meeting, pushed the military alliance's ambassadors to complete the deal before the forum even began. You can imagine the argument. Look, Trump won't be here forever. Let's just, everybody swallow their pride. Let's paper over all the difficulties. Let's get it done. So the agreement, right, the communique from the NATO summit, usually fought over, they decided we're not going to give Trump a chance to use this for wrecking, because he was already trying to wreck the group of 7 in Canada, right, attacking the Trudeau government in particular. So they rushed the machinations to get the policy done. And this was even Bolton demanding it. European and American officials say the president's top advisors are trying to protect the alliance. It's good to hear if it's true. Trump did try to break it up. You'll remember he said, I'll go my own way. And later he said, I'm not going to fight for Montenegro. So he did as much damage as he could. But the detailed communique did come out. And again, the word to all of them, this is also Kay Bailey Hutchinson, as far as we're told, the word to all of them was, forget about your little points that you want to get through. We've got to streamline this. We've got to avoid disaster. So I think what we may be seeing is, in some ways, a return to those famous days of 44 years ago, which was the Kissinger, the Henry Kissinger, Secretary of State, James Rodney Schlesinger, Pentagon chief, the two of them getting together and saying, here are the things we're going to let Nixon do, and here are the things we're not going to let him do. We're not going to let him start World War III. Any military orders, the generals have to turn to us to get it approved. So, it's certainly of interest. Now, it's very, very limited. It's short range, too, because I would say this is Bolton realizing. Bolton realizes if he presides over the breakup of NATO, then his name is mud now and forever, and he's afraid to do that. But Trump, obviously, his raving performances have left everybody in doubt. Now, what's happening? We got a new package of sanctions coming. Now, this is also, I think this is an example of what I'm just saying. This could go as far as banning the Russian airline Aeroflot from landing at Dulles Airport, Kennedy Airport, Logan, and similar places. And we'll be back in a minute with the details. The second hour of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking from Washington, D.C. It's midsummer. The dog days are here. And the crisis of the regime goes on. And we'll have more about this here in our second hour. But let's just summarize the idea, right, that Trump is in some ways in receivership, right? He does the raving. He does the tweeting, he does the Nuremberg rallies, and so forth, but the other decisions are being made elsewhere. Now, this is not ideal, needless to say. You'd want to have a real president, but it's better to put Trump in receivership because of his manifest inability to grasp any of these things. So we're told that at the latest NATO summit, right, the one that Trump tried to wreck the best way he could, right, saying, I'm not going to defend Montenegro and this other thing that he had to talk about, right, insulting the British, insulting all the rest of them, and I'm ready to go my own way, said Trump. Well, somebody get a net. And of course, part of this, I think the British can remember what it was like to jolly along King Edward VIII when he was essentially pro-fascist. He was pro-German, pro-National Socialist, right? Remember that in 1936, and they had to neutralize him and then get rid of him. So they had their way, their method, and we have a legal system that allows this to happen. So the idea was, for example, the NATO communique was about 30 pages. It was 79 paragraphs, 23 pages. Now, Trump is never going to read that, of course, because he's a moron. So they simply said, oh, Mr. President, it's going to be a great victory. People are going to love it. They're going to thank you for it, blah, blah, blah. And it slipped through. Now, in reality, what we have is it's not Montenegro. It's that there will be some defense. This is called the 430s. The 430s. And it says NATO will soon be able to mobilize 30 battalions, I think 30 air squadrons, and 30 combat warships within 30 days. 30 battalions of ground troops, 30 air squadrons, 30 warships within 30 days. This was Mattis wanted this. So the idea is it's essentially a rapid reaction force, a rapid deployment force inside NATO, not outside, not out of area. This is now in area. And of course, before Stephen Cohen or somebody says, this is the new Barbarossa, this is the new attack on the Soviet Union. No, you can't hope to do anything vis-a-vis Russia with 30 battalions. But what you can do is put up a pretty good, robust tripwire, so anybody who's going to try to roll over 30 battalions is choosing war, and it makes it all very clear. And if you don't have the tripwire, then you get into this gray area where you can have various fifth columnists, right? You can have the Henleins. Henlein was Hitler's man in the Sudetenland, right? You can have these kinds of provocateurs, and then it turns into street fighting, and it's hard to decide what's going on. But 30 battalions, 30 air squadrons, 30 warships, 30 days. That's for the Baltic, the Black, and similar places. So that was smuggled through, and Trump doesn't know what's going on. Now, so we've got two examples so far. We've got McMaster and I think Tillerson. They were both leaving at about the same time. They said, okay, we'll fix this wagon. We'll oust 60 Russian diplomats, saying, Mr. President, we're only ousting as many as the other countries. Yeah, the other countries all added up. And Trump figured that out later and freaked out. But, of course, he is in a trap of his own making because he's such a notorious appeaser and bootlicker. So now we have economic sanctions on Russia. Now, these are they could be quite interesting. And, of course, the main thing is to get some fighting going on. In other words, political fighting, obviously. We're not for war here, but appeasement is the guarantee of war. So put it that way. You've got to break out of the logic of appeasement and do something to assert yourself. So what are we told? That the U.S. is going to call on Russia to agree within 90 days to stop all use of chemical weapons, permit inspections to confirm their elimination. This is all the Skripal case, right? The two Skripals and then the hapless couple that apparently found one of these vectors later on. What happens? If they don't, if Russia does not cooperate, the law requires the implementation of some, at least, of a broad range of additional measures. For example, withdrawal of U.S. support for international loans and U.S. bank loans, prohibition of landing rights for Russian airlines. That's Aeroflot. That's the one that would really hurt. Suspension of diplomatic relations. Now, the idea is, what is this? It's quite robust. Is that Trump? How can that be Trump? Well, I think it is a piece of legislation. But here's the thing. They have successfully told Trump, you have no choice. This is the law. If you don't do this, you will be in violation of the law. You will be in danger. And therefore, you better do it. Okay. It looks like Pompeo did this. Pompeo, right? So, evil doing good. Pompeo has determined that the spring attack in Salisbury, England, right, out there on Salisbury Plain, the home of Mr. Pecksniff in Martin Chuzzlewit by Dickens, Salisbury, that was the Novichok, right? That was Russian chemical warfare, nerve agents, and so forth. And once you've got those things being used, the chemical and nerve agents, then we have a law from 1991 which, according to the people briefing Trump, says, Mr. President, you are required to act. Once the administration determines Russian responsibility for a chemical or biological weapons attack, you must implement these measures. Now, must. This is where I think some flim-flam might have come in. But again, these are noble lies, if that's what it was, right? Mr. President, you have no choice. Well, it could be finessed, I'm sure, or he could defy it. But you'll get the idea. So it looks like part of what's going on is a takeover by others who are not Trump. Now, of course, Russia is very upset. And, of course, you got to remember now, we're upset too. Hey, good that you're upset. Take your goddamn hands off the U.S. elections. And we're told now that you were intervening against McCaskill and Shaheen. Back off. Get out of here. Shut down those GRU people. Shut down the Internet Research Agency and so forth. Right? Stop doing this stuff and you'll fare better. Cease the aggression. Now, in the middle of all this, we have Little Rand Paul. Little Rand Paul. You remember that some people always said, oh, the libertarians, you need them. They're going to be the last line of defense for freedoms. No, they're not. The libertarians are the last line of defense for oligarchy and ultimately for all the evils bound up with that. So we've got to say a few words about Rand Paul's trip to Russia, where he comes out as the appeaser, the arch appeaser, worse than Trump and Trump's errand supposed to be. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So you've got Rand Paul, the most extreme appeaser. You've also got that group of 7 Republican appeasers, right? The Munich set, the Munichois of 1938. And remember, they were the ones who went over there just before the Helsinki summit, and they kowtowed to Putin or to his various minions. Some of these people don't even rate a meeting with Putin. I don't think Little Rand gets a meeting with Putin. So this is now the Republican Party. At the Ohio rally last weekend, we had Trump backers with T-shirts, I'd rather be a Russian than a Democrat. Huh? So that's exactly what you had. That's the Vichy mentality, right? The Vichy, that's Vichy America. You remember there were people in France who said, we hate Leon Blum, the socialist prime minister. We prefer Hitler, and that their line was then, better the Nazi dictator than Leon Blum. This is getting there, isn't it? So this is things have gone quite far, right? The Republicans, by the way, they really have gone off the charts. So Trump is over there. Who do you get to meet with? Konstantin Kosachev. Konstantin Kosachev. He's the chairman of the International Affairs Committee of the Russian Federation Council. It's kind of a upper house of the relative to the Duma, the State Duma. This is the upper house. And this guy, Kosachev, to show his diplomatic abilities, he says the United States is a police state organized on the basis of lynching. Lynching. Okay, now lynching is a serious problem. We are against it, but this is not an accurate description of the United States. So the other thing, of course, is that Little Rand has, in order to ingratiate himself, right? Maybe Little Rand wants to be Secretary of State in the second Trump administration. Little Rand, you're whistling in the dark. It's not going to happen. There's not going to be one. Maybe he thinks he could even get a piece of the action in Trump's first term. I don't know. But he invited a group of Russian members of parliament, right? Duma and this Federation Council. He said, come to Washington. We'll have wonderful exchanges. Well, the goggle-eyed screech owl of Kentucky, Mitch McConnell, says, no. Neither Congress nor the leader, this is actually his spokesperson, neither Congress nor Mitch has invited any delegation from Russia to the Capitol, says Mitch's spokesman. Senator Paul is the only one that I know who is discussing it. Spokesman for Ryan says that's not something we've discussed. We've never discussed it. Get the idea? So there it is. And the libertarians, once again, turn out to be the last line of defense for the most reactionary, most opprobrious, most horrendous of causes, right? They're just out of this world. So that's more or less where we're left. Now, I would point out, right, these sanctions. One interesting article I saw yesterday that Trump has gotten to specific decisions on tariffs in two matters, and he's lost both of them. One is the ZTE telephone company of China, and the other one is I would add the other one is this Deripaska, right, and the Rusal, the Russian aluminum company. In the case of ZTE, when Trump said you're hit by sanctions, that thing was going to shut down. It was going to be gone. ZTE was key on smuggling, bootlegging U.S. technology to North Korea and similar delightful places. It was also the case that the ZTE cheap cell phones are the leading edge of the Chinese Belt and Road imperialist takeover of the String of Pearls and these other places. And the only reason there still is a ZTE is that Trump caved. He folded. He didn't want to do it. He was afraid he might lose his good friend Xi. And then, of course, the other one was after the list of Russian oligarchs was put out some months ago, the stock price for Rusal tanked. It went down by at least half. They screamed for mercy. Putin got on the phone, and Trump backed off on that one, too. Mnuchin articulated the sellout. But what this shows is that the U.S. economic sanctions approach has enormous power. You could stop these people in their tracks. You could say, you really want to wreck your economy for the sake of messing with our elections and otherwise, polluting the social media with your backward, Russophile. There's no other way to put it. Slavophile. Your Slavophile remarks and subversive approaches. No, it'd probably make them back off. So that's more or less where we are. Now, in terms of domestic U.S. politics, we've just had these results now in Ohio 12. Ohio 12 is too close to call. Nobody knows, and it won't be known for at least another week or so. So all of Trump's crowing is premature. From what we can see here, the interesting one is that when Congressman Tiberi of this district ran last time, he got 37% of the votes. This time the Republicans have gotten less than 1% in terms of the lead. So 37% lead for Tiberi in 2016 and about 0.5% lead for Balderdash in the current contest. So this is still up in the air. Now, you've also got a whole bunch of other election results. We've gone through most of these during the week. Got to remember, it usually takes until the second term of a Republican president for the corruption to become a huge issue. That would be in the case of Reagan. In the case of Bush, it was Congressman Foley molesting the Pages and Abramoff and his 21 fellow convictions in 2006-2007. And now you're getting it just about immediately in the first term of Trump. So Trump's in trouble on this front, too. And we'll be back in a minute on World. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Topley here in Washington, D.C. So now we've got the stock jobber, right? Securities fraud, insider trading charges against Congressman Collins of upstate New York, Geneseo, and similar places. Not quite as far west as Buffalo, but almost. And this was the first person on the Hill, the first congressman, and before any senator, way before Sessions, to come out and endorse Trump for the presidency. So, looks bad. And we have to take our hats off to the fine journalism of Jerry Zaremski. Jerry Zaremski of the Buffalo News. It's a paper that I had a soft spot for because they showed some fairness when I ran for the U.S. Senate in New York State back in the late 80s. Buffalo News was one of the better ones. All right, so now we've got Collins, friend of Trump, Cohen, his lawyer, Manafort, we've got Don Jr., we've got Flynn, we've got all these people, Papadopoulos, on and on. It is the swamp. There is no draining of the swamp. This is an extreme swampy administration. But now let's try to do two things now. Let's talk a little bit about what it looked like at this trial. Right? So you go down to Alexandria. It's the Eastern District. It's the Albert V. Bryan courthouse. I can remember when that character was still on the bench. This was not good. This is the Rocket Docket. You always have to assume in a place like that the jury pool is very heavily salted with government officials. Normally that might be something to object to, but this time maybe it's an advantage. I don't know. Now, the jury. Now, obviously I went in there, right? You try to look at the jury. You look at the judge. You look at the two tables, right? There's from where you're sitting, you can see the defense table on the right, and Manafort is sitting surrounded by his defense lawyers. I think he had 3 for most of the time. On the government side, it looked like 4. You had Osonye, and you had a couple of others. But Osonye was, for the time I was there, Osonye was doing most of the work. But now the jury. Here's what you see. In theory, on the jury itself, it's 6 men and 6 women, but there are 4 alternates, and I think there are more alternate women than not. One of the things you do notice is that black jurors, I really couldn't see any from where I was. Doesn't mean they weren't there, right? Because you basically have to sit there and see what you can see. It looked to me like there might have been 1 or 2 people from South Asia, right? India, Bangladesh. It looked like 2 or 3 Asians, people of Chinese or Korean or Japanese origins. But otherwise, it was it lacked the element of black-white, or compared to these others too, diversity. Now, here's what I noticed, though. There was one person that looked to me like problematic case. There was one guy sitting there who he didn't seem to be paying attention to the proceedings. The proceedings were admittedly dry, but you got to focus, right? You got to bear down and try to figure out what's going on. So this guy is like running his hands through his hair, looking around. He reminded me, if you know the 12 Angry Men, the guy sitting down at the back of the table towards the washroom, the guy with the fedora who said he had tickets for a baseball game and the tickets were burning a hole in his pocket, and he was just, oh gosh, when is this going to end? How do I have to be here? That seemed to be the spirit exuding from this one guy, and I don't know if he's a juror or an alternate, but you could see the body language, in other words, of that type. Now, Manafort's body language is that he's looking away from the audience, right, away from the visitors here. Behind this, there's like a railing, right, a wooden railing, which you can open. There's no lock, but you have to open it. So he's hunched over. Manafort, not holding his head high. He's hunched over. And then you have these witnesses. I saw principally two of them. There was a woman called Rodriguez, who was an accountant from the Citizens Bank of New York. And then there was a heavy-set guy by the name of Safarian, who was a loan officer from the Bank of California. And essentially, within the 3.5 hours or so that I saw, you could see that the prosecution was proving repeatedly from different angles the fact that Manafort was guilty of bank fraud, that he had lied, that he had misrepresented absolutely critical things on loan applications. He hid certain properties that he owned. He tried to hide different debts that he had connected with those properties. And this was, it's a series of financial institutions, and they were heading, as they said already yesterday, that yesterday being Thursday, that the prosecution was going to rest on Friday, right, as presumably right about now when I'm recording this, not in Alexandria. So they were going to go after this guy Kalk, and this was this bank in Chicago that gave Manafort the $16 million loan, and the guy thought he was going to become Secretary of the Army. So that's the story on the jury. That's there's an interesting way that they present the evidence, right? The government, when I was there, the government was up to about 300 exhibits. So you can imagine that, right, over all those days. And the way they do it is they say, can you, Mr. Safarian, can you identify this? Yes, that's a loan application. Then they turn to the judge, and this is now Ellis, and say, Your Honor, the government would bring into evidence this. This is okay. And does the defense object? No. And then may we publish it? Publish it means there are these screens on the walls of the courtroom where they project these documents. And some of them are quite interesting. And the general idea is, as they keep pointing out in questioning these witnesses, does the bank have a reason to want to know how much debt this guy has? Yes, because that's how we can tell whether there are going to be resources to pay back our loan. If there are other loans competing, then we may not fare well. So you get the idea. What you see then is bank fraud and other kinds of fraud. And, of course, those are subject to draconian penalties, right? People used to joke, right? You could kill somebody and serve less time than you would for bank fraud. It's extremely punishable crime, right? Punishable by some really horrendous things. This is, of course, the Rocket Docket. Now, Ellis is a hard person to figure out. I can't really say that I have a kind of ironclad or watertight explanation of him. He is a curmudgeon. He is in love with his own wisdom. I think when there are objections, during the time I was there, probably half a dozen objections, and I would say about half of them sustained and half of them overruled. Anyway, we'll be back in just a minute on World Crisis. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. It's already our last segment here on this dog day afternoon. So anyway, that's some impression, right? The Rocket Docket out in front. They have a somewhat heroic statue of Justice blindfolded with the scales. But then it says, justice delayed is justice denied. The Rocket Docket. It often means that you get 30 days From the time they hit you with the indictment, you get 30 days to put your case together. The government has had all the time in the world. They've had all kinds of resources that maybe you don't have. You've got to start from a nothing defense in some cases until, within a month. You've got to mount the defense sometimes. So there it says, they show you the hair, right? The hair is jumping across, but the part that sticks out is the face of the tortoise. So apparently they're, talking about making haste slowly. All right, so there we go. Now, we just want to talk now about the Charlottesville anniversary. Right? This is, of course, a very serious matter. What is the issue in Charlottesville? It is the emergence of a clearly neo-Nazi or Nazi or fascist form of gang violence in our time here in the United States. And I would propose probably at this point fascist is about as good as any other way to describe them. There are some people, as we've tried to point out, they think that calling them white supremacists is more radical than calling them fascists or even Nazis. It is not more radical. It is far less so. White supremacists have been around for a long time. There are lots of them. The poll shows that 49% of the American people think that the tenant of the Oval is a white supremacist or something of that type. Fascism, however, is something unusual. I think it's going to get more attention, and it's also scientifically more true. To be a fascist or a neo-Nazi or a Nazi implies certainly race theory, what they used to call it race science. Of course, it's not, it's pseudoscience. But it includes that, and it includes so much more. You're going to be a warmonger. You're going to be a racist. You're going to be a misogynist. We've always talked about this, that misogyny, the hatred of women, is an integral part of fascist movements. This part is not so well known here in the United States. Now, therefore, what happened a year ago? Well, first of all, obviously a failure of policing, and we've heard some discussions among the people, right, rehashing those decisions, the people who made those decisions. This demonstration in Charlottesville should never have happened, especially in a state where everybody's running around with guns, the so-called open carry. This is a monstrosity in its own right. But then to have that become a relatively violent demonstration, you're very lucky that more than one person did not get killed. So the one thing I would say, hearing the way they talked about this, dear local officials, the Constitution is not a suicide pact. Yes, the First Amendment normally takes precedence, but I would say you had more than enough probable cause to say this is going to be a violent demonstration and we're going to ban it. In other words, you can ban it when you know that the purpose of the demonstration is not protest, but to provoke violence. That's what you had. Should never have happened. Now, we're told that in Charlottesville this week, they have tried to make sure, down there in Virginia, they have tried to prevent any anniversary demonstrations. We're told our reporters on the scene are telling us that plainclothes police and other police, right, all kinds of police are all over the place in Charlottesville. So there's a certain hope that whatever might occur there, right, because it would be without a permit, that they would be able to shut it down. Right? We're told cops are crawling all over the city, and there are many city and maybe state officials, county officials, incognito who are around. So good. So let's hope that's under control. There are some of them they're going to try to go there. The anniversary, of course, is Saturday, the 11th of August. But then there's also on the 12th here in the District of Columbia, there's going to be an attempt to mount some kind of a demonstration here. And again, the Constitution is not a suicide pact. You don't have to let a tragedy that you can see coming and you can prevent. You don't have to let that happen and simply be resigned and fatalistic because you think you don't have the authority. Find the authority. If you scratch deep enough, you're gonna find it. So the Republicans now clearly running their election campaign on what? The minor note is that they hate Pelosi and they want to attack Pelosi. Now, we would suggest, Pelosi, it's probably time for you to step aside to allow younger, more vigorous, less compromised leaders, right? In particular, the objection against Pelosi is that she has this husband who is a financier and that this does not inspire confidence. And we've seen, things like the Wall Street sales tax get knocked out because of the advice of this husband of hers, right? He seems to be very much a stock market ideologue. All right, so that's her, and we think it would probably be a good idea, a bait and switch. In other words, let the Republicans make all their TV ads now, which they're doing, and let them spend all their money on that and be ready to go. And then, right before they're ready to let fly, she drops out and says, I need to spend more time with my family, and so forth. Right? Keep your seat, right? Keep your seat. If it's good enough for John Quincy Adams, old man eloquent, you can do it. John Quincy Adams, after he left the presidency, he was a former president, and he was not ashamed to be in the House of Representatives. It's a great place, and he exercised real influence. So that's the minor key. Right? The minor key is we hate Pelosi for the Republicans. The major key is MS-13, and we need to bash these families. We want to congratulate Judge Sullivan here in the District of Columbia. I think he's an African-American judge. More power to him, saying, you tell Sessions, if he doesn't bring those people back and reunite those families, I'm going to hold him in contempt. Good, good. I was actually wondering if you can hold Sessions in contempt. Maybe if you could identify the responsibility as being with Trump, you could then declare Trump in contempt of Congress. And this might tend to sweep away these absurd limits on can the president be subpoenaed? You bet he can. Can he be indicted? Yes, he can. That's the only way to do anything, because with this Republican Congress, reports, you think they're going to pay attention to a report? It's ridiculous. So, Laura Ingraham says that the issue in the election is going to be demographic change and the demographic change wrought by immigration. Well, we would say the following: the old order changeth, yielding place to the new, and God fulfills himself in many ways, lest one good custom should corrupt the world. And it means everything is always changing. So the choice for those Trumpers out there is, look at those people from Central America. That's one choice, right? Bring them in and build a workforce around them. Otherwise, look at the communist Chinese. Look at Beijing. Look at Xi. Look at that police state. It's a fearsome police state. Those are your choices. Learn Chinese or work with the people from Central America and South America who would like to come here, and that we ought to be welcoming because they are key. This week on World Crisis Radio.